Part 16. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 154. If the murderer is not one person, but dozens, or even, hundreds of people, do you think they can still be arrested and announced? Subai pursed his lips. Of course, this action was hidden under the mask and Chu Jiangguo could not see it. Then, Subai slowly digested Chu Jiangguo's words. In the end, Subai spit out two words from his mouth. Character. Interesting. Yes, it's very interesting. Generally speaking, in homicides, especially homicides where the deceased is only one person, the murderer is basically one person, with at most one accomplice added. If the number of murderers is larger, there is actually no need to murder. Yes, it has become another nature. In the past, there were actually various speculations about this case on the internet, and even the so-called suspect was identified, and various possibilities were devised. One of the most recognized ones was that the suspect had an unusual family background, so he was protected by the superiors. As a result, the police who originally said that the case was about to be solved suddenly stopped talking and said nothing or announced nothing. However, the eyes of the masses have never been sharp, and they are often the group of people who are most easily deceived. Moreover, the instinct of the masses is to believe the facts they want to believe. Most people are too lazy to explore the so-called truth, or even see it. The headline of a news article started to scold Fang Qiu for not even bothering to read the full text of the news. This is also the classic definition of many internet marketing plans in the future when internet media develops. Subai was not actually too surprised by Chu Jiangguo's words. On the contrary, he found it very interesting. However, behind the fun, there was also a big trouble. If the murderer was really not one person but a group of people as Chu Jiangguo said, then the definition of the bonding object that I was looking for suddenly became larger, and it even felt like finding a needle in a haystack. I didn't have the ability to let the police restart the investigation of this case on a large scale. If they still wanted to investigate these 100 people, if so, then this realistic mission can basically be declared a failure, because with Subai's own strength, there is no way to complete it. Chu Jiangguo tapped his fingers on the mouse, then sighed and looked at Subai. Nearly 100 students went to college in Shanghai. In 1994, college students were much more valuable than they are now, and their influence and social value were also greater. If all these 100 people were arrested and listed as murder suspects, you know what it meant at the time. Subai spread out his hand, clenched it, and then opened it suddenly. The meaning is very simple. Meaning, explosion. 100 college students were the murderers. Even thinking about it now makes people shudder, let alone more than 20 years ago. Therefore, compared with this, suppressing this case seems to be the most stable method. Of course, the premise is that Chu Jiangguo is telling the truth. I need more precise information, such as why, Subai asked. Chu Jiangguo hesitated for a moment, then relaxed. Those are listed under confidentiality regulations. I can't tell them. Even if you kill me, I can't tell them. Pedantry. Subai put his feet away from the table and stood up. I need clues and the truth. This is very important to me. But I really can't say. The only thing I can reveal is that the hundreds of college students were all participants, and they were not like the indifferent passers-by in the Xiaoyu incident a few years ago. They just pretended not to see it. Will be criticized morally, but legally, they are not at fault. In this case, those students are all participants. They pushed Wang Shui into the abyss again and again. In the end, I saw with my own eyes that Wang Shui turned into a human and a ghost step by step. As a person who has been on the battlefield, I felt a little shuddering. What kind of thing would make this group of people receive higher education? The students became the executioners of evil. You've been so secretive about it, why don't you say more and tell me directly? To tell you the truth, I can't use force on you, and I can't really hurt you, but if I don't get the information and truth I want from you, I will follow the clues and go to your original boss or as a subordinate. I don't know what I will do when I treat them. Moreover, even if you notify me in advance, warn me, or even search for me, you also know that it will be of no use to me." Chu Jiangguo sighed, opened his drawer, took a worn notebook in his hand, then placed it heavily on the table, and said righteously, "This is a major secret and I will never tell you." Subai nodded, walked over, and stabbed Chu Jiangguo on the neck. Chu Jiangguo fainted. Subai took the notebook in his hand and opened the study door. Chu Zhao's mother had been sitting there, waiting anxiously on the sofa. "Auntie, my uncle has fainted. Give him some water. I'll leave first." After saying that, Subai walked directly through the hall, opened the door, and walked out of the house grandly. When he returned to the hotel where he was staying, it was already around 1 o'clock in the morning. Subai was not in a hurry to look through this notebook. Instead, he took off his windbreaker and mask first, went into the bathroom, took a shower, and then wrapped himself in a bath towel. He came to the bed and took the notebook in his hand. In this notebook, Chu Jiangguo recorded his original views on the case and various clues that emerged after the investigation step by step. Subai could also see that for Chu Jiangguo, an old criminal investigator, it was very important to witness the tragic situation of the victim before his death. He must be very dissatisfied with the fact that this case has been shelved because the law failed to hold the public accountable, so this notebook appeared. While reading the contents of the notebook, Subai imagined the scene at that time. In 1994, Shanghai University was a well-known institution in the country. Just as it was more than 20 years later, it is also a giant in China's education sector today. College students back then were indeed worth much more and had a higher social status than college students today. Subai was standing in a classroom at this time, which was a self-study school. Following the description in Chu Jiangguo's notebook, he began to restore the truth of the murder case that had been sealed for more than 20 years in his mind. The study room was very large, similar to the lecture halls of later generations. At this time, in the corner at the back of the first row, a girl was taking notes. Subai walked over. The girl raised her head and smiled at Subai. It was very sweet. "Quiet. This is Wang Shui before she was poisoned. A very pretty girl." Subai had seen photos of her. Even 20 years later, her appearance would be considered upper middle class among college girls. She was very beautiful. After Wang Shui glanced at Subai, she continued to work on her own questions. Subai sat down next to Wang Shui. After a while, Wang Shui got up, probably preparing to go to the toilet, and left the lecture theater. Immediately afterwards, Subai saw a vague figure walking into the lecture theater and stuffed a small note under Wang Shui's book. Subai constructed this vague figure in his mind based on the narrative in Chu Jiangguo's notes. Subai didn't know who it was, and neither did Chu Jiangguo. After all, this case did not identify all the murderers and participants. They were all arrested, but many details and things are actually impossible to verify at all. Subai only knew from the notebook that there was a person who stuffed a note into Wang Shui when Wang Shui was not paying attention, and this note started the incident that shocked the whole country that year and even started to take place 20 years later. The prelude to the poisoning case was often discussed by the National People's Congress during the period. After the figure left, Wang Shui came back. He still smiled at Subai, then sat back in his seat. When he was flipping through the book, he saw the note that had been placed under the book. Subai also came over. He knew what was written on the note, because it was recorded in Chu Jiangguo's notes that Wang Shui was in a coma after being poisoned, and even at the last step, his health became worse and worse until he died. During the process, Subai didn't know whether Chu Jiangguo knew the contents of the note from Wang Shui or investigated through other channels. For example, even if Chu Jiangguo finally suppressed the case due to pressure from above to maintain stability, he should have also done so at the beginning. He did a lot of investigations and even interrogated some of the participants in his eyes. After Wang Shui, the victim, was poisoned, her intelligence and other aspects began to deteriorate rapidly, and the clues and information obtained from her mouth may not be the same. There will be a lot. What is written on the note is: want to experience an unusual feeling of killing? Do you want to experience the tension and excitement of killing without even realizing it? If you want, please leave your thoughts on the back of this note and throw it into the trash can in your study room. Wang Shui frowned and muttered, "It's so boring." However, Wang Shui did not throw away the note, which looked like a prank, but wrote a paragraph on the back of the note. "Classmate, I don't know who you are, but please don't make such jokes, because people who make such jokes will make people feel very uneducated." Wang Shui added a few exclamation points at the end. She was reviewing the content for the upcoming exam and was very upset, so when she met such a joker, she became even more angry. Subai had been watching silently. In fact, these were the scenes he simulated in his mind based on the investigation contents recorded in Chu Jiangguo's notebook. Soon, it was getting dark. Wang Shui packed up her books and pens, got up and left the self-study classroom. When she walked out of the classroom, she threw the note into the paper basket of the self-study classroom. Subai didn't leave. He kept sitting here. After about half an hour, the lights were turned off. The administrator of the teaching building must have pulled down the power switch to get off work. At this moment, Subai was sitting in the corner of the study room and heard the sound of opening and closing doors coming from other study rooms on this floor. It was obvious that someone was entering and coming out quickly. Soon, the door of the classroom where Subai was located was pushed open, and a dark figure walked in and looked at the waste basket. He held a flashlight in his hand and looked at the words on the note. When he saw when Wang Shui left the words, he looked very excited and angry. Subai saw that the black shadow was already trembling with anger. It must be some words in Wang Shui's words that just stimulated the black shadow's back scales. The study room was dark, with only two people, one was Subai sitting at the back, and the other was a dark figure standing at the door holding a note. Subai couldn't help but feel a little sad. Was that girl a target just because of the words he left behind? Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 155. This is a mysterious feeling, and it seems to be Wang Shui's own unnecessary action, which finally stimulated the black shadow. At this point, Subai can be sure that it was Wang Shui's message behind the note that completely angered the murderer, and also laid the groundwork for the Shanghai poisoning case that later shocked the whole country. Perhaps, if Wang Shui had just treated it as an ordinary prank note that day and thrown it away, or if she was in a better mood, she would have just written something and participated in it as a game, maybe her ending and future would have been completely different. It's different. Of course, these things did not exist in the first place. Subai just relied on the records in Chu Jiangguo's notebook to simulate the scene in his mind. Everything was destined and had already happened. Subai was more like it is the meaningless emotion that comes from my heart when I sit in the cinema and watch a movie. Subai got up and left the study room. Subai walked into another study room, and then, it was done. The study rooms in universities are sometimes used as classrooms, but there are generally not many courses in universities. It is actually very easy and simple to find an empty classroom. Subai didn't like going to the library very much when he was in university. Instead, I like to find a vacant classroom with a cup of tea and some books to do my own thing. However, the number of people studying by themselves will be greatest in the evening. Subai leaned back slightly and sat on the chair. The wind and clouds outside the window kept changing. Soon the sky became gray and the sun set. Students walked into the study room one by one. Most of them had their own preferences when choosing a study room, such as a specific classroom and a specific location. In this latter classroom that can accommodate 100 people, there are more than a dozen students working at their desks at this time. When I was doing the questions, no one was making any noise in the classroom, and it seemed very quiet. Immediately afterwards, Subai saw a dark figure walking in from the classroom door. He paused in front of the classroom for a while, seeming to identify some people, and then walked over on his own initiative, handing out the pieces of paper so blatantly placed on a specific person's desk. In fact, many students were not very surprised. In fact, Subai could feel that these students were very familiar with the person who sent the note, and even had a vague sense of awe. Awe. The word awe is a word that often appears in Chu Jiangguo's notebooks, which means that the person who sent the note has great influence among the students. He may be a teacher or a cadre in the student union. It is a pity that the investigation cannot be continued in depth due to the suspension from above, because once it goes in depth, it will inevitably lead to great implication and create a chain reaction. Even if the person is not arrested, he will have to be arrested. This is not a force from above. What Wei Stability wanted to see was a murder case involving hundreds of students from key universities. It sounded simply sensational, so Chu Jiangguo didn't know the true identity of this person. The male student in front of Subai also received the note and seemed a little flattered. He even stood up to express his gratitude to the person who sent the note, and then sat down and started to read the note. Standing up and walking to the male student, Subai looked at the note with him. The content of this note was also recorded in Chu Jiangguo's notebook. It was a very simple paragraph. Now, I've found a goal. A vulgar and dirty woman. A woman who thinks her eyes are higher than her head. A selfish and mean woman. A woman who is so disgusting that it is difficult to look directly at her. What do I do? What do I do? No. Is what we should do. Write the reply on the back and throw it into the trash can before leaving. The cleaning ant usually cleans during the day the next day, so don't worry that I won't receive the note you left. I will take note of each of your replies. I saw it and remembered it in my mind. The male student was very excited. He turned over the note and immediately wrote on the back. Kill her, kill this bitch, woman. Subai frowned slightly. He felt that he somewhat understood the process and gameplay. In 1994, smartphones were still far away from becoming popular. Even mobile phones were a luxury product for most people. At the same time, this kind of the method of using paper notes to convey information and then publish it can give the audience a sense of stability and stimulation. The words written one by one can also have an immersive sense of sensory substitution. This is a killing game. Subai can already predict how it will develop later, and in the end, it will create a tragic ending for Wang Shui. It is obviously unrealistic for these proud college students to suddenly take the initiative to participate in a murder case, but using the inherent curiosity of young people and letting them participate step by step in this way is undoubtedly a good thing in that era. It was a very avant-garde method. After all, the crime occurred in 1994, an era that had not yet reached the explosion of information technology. Human thinking still had great limitations, but someone could run a game like this. Even as a bystander, Subai was curious about what the real instigator behind the scenes was doing today, more than 20 years later. The lights in the teaching building were about to be turned off. The students left the study room one by one and returned to the dormitories. The administrator also pulled the switch on each floor. The study room quickly became dark, but soon, a dark shadow appeared. He walked into the study room where Subai was, went to flip through the paper basket, and then collected all the notes. Then he left the study room and went to another room to continue collecting. Subai followed him out and saw the dark figure going in and out of one study room after another. Chu Jiangguo's notebook recorded that there were nearly 100 students who were actually involved in the murder, but these students were together with one person or several. Operated by a team of individuals. Otherwise, it would be difficult for one person to execute such a large amount of work perfectly, and once something goes wrong one day, the note fails to be delivered on a certain day, or it is too late or it is delivered to the wrong person, then the game will be ruined. The attraction immediately collapsed. Then, in Sudbai's sight, 2 black shadows began to appear, then 3 black shadows, and finally turned into 4 black shadows. 4 black shadows, that's about it. No matter how many people there is no need to continue this game. They can form a small killing game by themselves. There is no need to recruit players outside, and there will be no such players. The fun of playing games. The sky is bright again. Sudbai saw Wang Shui coming to the study room in the morning, taking out a book and sorting out his notes, very seriously and attentively. Sudbai leaned against the door of Wang Shui's classroom and looked at the people inside. Well, Wang Shui was the only one inside now. After a while, more students slowly entered the self-study classroom, almost 30. If you want to go to class, 30 people are not too many, but for self-study, 30 people are already quite crowded. Normally, a student who wants to study by himself will subconsciously look for an empty place with few people. In the classroom, it is best to have no one around you, in front of you, around you, etc. This is more suitable for self-study. Wang Shui was also a little surprised, finding that there were a lot of people in the study room, but fortunately everyone was quiet, so she continued to lower her head and do her own thing. Sudbai walked in, reached out and flipped through a student's book, and sure enough he found a small note. This girl is currently studying in the second to last row on the left side of classroom AJ203. Do you want to go and see the target we are about to hunt? Remember, keep quiet. Remember, stay calm. Remember, stay calm. Yesterday, all of you replied that you wanted to kill her, haha, of course, there are still many people who can't come because they have classes in the morning, but it doesn't matter, there are still opportunities, we just secretly observe our own first. Pray. Write your reply on the back of a small piece of paper and throw it into the waste basket in this lecture hall. The same old rules apply. Putting the small piece of paper back on the table, Sudbai walked to the podium and looked at the 30 or so students sitting around. They all secretly looked at Wang Shui in unison. The scene seemed very strange. Wang Shui seemed to be too selfless in reading and taking notes, and found nothing. Sudbai suddenly felt that it was ridiculous, really ridiculous. More than 30 students. No one went to remind Wang Shui. Everyone really treated it as a game, entered the rhythm of this game, and began to examine their prey. The fantasy is really a fantasy. Compared with the discussion on the internet in the past 20 years, it is believed that the background of the murderer is too great. Shen Shen's reasonable guess was that the scene Sudbai saw now was indeed difficult to understand. Time passed quickly. When the students who came to observe left the classroom, they all threw their notes into the paper basket. Sudbai didn't know what they wrote, because up to this point, Chu Jiangguo's notes had not been recorded. The contents of the notes he had seen before were actually recorded by Chu Jiangguo. Later, because the investigation was interrupted and the case was sealed, Chu Jiangguo actually did not have detailed information. However, it at least allowed Sudbai to continue reading the case in general. The shadow came again at night to pick up the note and then left. Sudbai continued to sit on the podium, and the next day came soon. Wang Shui did not come to the study room today, but there were still other students in the study room. The black shadow came to send notes again. There were about 10 students sitting here, and only 3 of them were sent. Obviously, he sent notes to 3 every day. Whoever sends the note also has his own purpose. Maybe the notes were sent to hundreds of people at the beginning, and then they were sent out layer by layer. In the end, there were probably only about 100 people left. It was a killing game that was so exaggerated and obvious, but it succeeded in the end, and forced the police to suppress the case in order to maintain stability and because the law would not hold the public accountable. Judging from the results, they succeeded. Sudbai walked up to a girl. The content of today's note was: "Come, let's discuss how we should kill that woman. Do you have any suggestions?" As is the old rule, the reply note is thrown into the wastebasket. This girl had a little baby fat and was quite good looking, but Sudbai stood next to her and watched as she began to write a note in reply. There is a substance in the laboratory that is actually more effective in killing people than poison, and it cannot be detected at all in China now. I think this woman will truly deserve her death if she uses this kind of thing against her. Sudbai pursed his lips. The main drama. Has it finally begun? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 156. A net has been slowly cast down. The students who were involved in it more than 20 years ago may not feel that much, but Sudbai, an outsider, can feel a suffocating pressure in his heart at this time. People can really become so terrible sometimes. As long as there is a suitable way and a proper guidance, nearly 100 top students from Shanghai University, who are regarded as the favorites of heaven and have unlimited future, have turned into perverts one by one. The demon, who was dying, began to communicate murder plans and plans in the form of notes. All of this is as simple as doing an experiment in a modern laboratory. It seems that this time, it is just an ordinary experiment, even if the result of the experiment is a life as vivid as myself. Sudbai could be sure that if these 100 college students were asked to actually use a knife to kill people, it is estimated that 99 of them would not dare, and it was hard to say which one of the remaining ones. After all, they were not stupid either. However, the organizers just used the simple note and daily guidance to get them all involved in this exciting game. Maybe most people have not really thought about what if Wang Shui really died. What will they do, because they are now fully immersed in this exciting game and cannot extricate themselves. This made Sudbai think of pyramid schemes. Yes, pyramid schemes. However, through the use of notes, specific words, and the selected people, these top students can be brainwashed in a special way. 20 years later, those organizations that engage in pyramid schemes will only know that shouting slogans and playing music were nothing compared to the scene in front of Sudbai. Sudbai was sitting in this classroom. Day after day after day, he was sitting here, watching the students around him coming in and leaving, and watching the administrator turn off the lights every night. The busy shadow behind. The contents of the notes were also constantly changing. Sudbai felt that the contents of the latter notes were a bit strange. They were not at the same level as what the previous people had said and written. Sudbai guessed that these were the specific contents. Chu Jiangguo didn't get the content, but he recovered it on his own through his inference and clues. The recovered words should have the same content and meaning, but Sudbai always felt that they lacked a sense of artistry. This kind of killing game pays attention to every detail, even the smallest punctuation mark. The result of the other party's careful consideration. However, the general idea and process were still clearly displayed in front of Sudbai. The contents of the notes in the past few days were: yesterday I summarized the methods of several classmates, which I think are good. Let's brainstorm what we think is the most feasible. The first one is poisoning, and a classmate listed a poisonous substance, which is not a poison in the ordinary sense, but a special substance that cannot be detected in the hospital. The second one is to ask the woman out first, then a few strong boys are responsible for killing and transferring, and a few girls are responsible for dealing with the aftermath and establishing alibis relationships with each other. The third is to use many means of intimidation, such as threatening letters, or some artificially created strange things in the dormitory, to make the woman collapse first, and finally lead her to commit suicide. Several classmates made this suggestion, one of them more detailed methods are also listed. To be honest, when we are writing and discussing, a beautiful life will bloom into the most beautiful and gorgeous fireworks in our hands. It's beautiful, isn't it? As the old rule goes, reply in the wastebasket. To sum up everyone's opinions on yesterday's 3 methods, most people think that the second suggestion is too conspicuous. The more people there are, the more convenient it is, but it can also easily reveal flaws. The third suggestion is too time-consuming and prone to too many mistakes. Variable. Well, the first suggested method actually has the most support, and many people have asked what kind of substance it is. I'm sorry, I can't tell you here because it's a secret. We must keep your identities confidential. In fact, many of the people who received the notes are not actually participating in this killing game. The notes they received are also some holiday greetings or some meaningless messages. The discussion rather than the written content you see now is sent to them just to cover their ears and eyes, and to ensure everyone's safety and privacy. Therefore, this is a game completely in the dark. We can have nothing to worry about. The old rule is to throw replies in the wastebasket, as always. Today's note, some people will have an extra paragraph at the bottom, and some people will not have it at the bottom, because I am honored to tell you that this plan has been officially launched. This is what we have discussed and exchanged these days. As a result, each of us is a part of it, but we don't know who each other is. Maybe that person is your roommate, your girlfriend, or the person you have a crush on. Do you find it interesting? We believe that those who have received the special content will be able to complete our plan, so let's take our plan forward in a down-to-earth manner. The old rule is to throw replies in the wastebasket, as always. To inform everyone of the progress of the matter, through the efforts of several classmates, we have obtained the substance we need. Our plan is half successful. Next, we will let her drink the water with this substance. But don't worry, we have made special messages for specific people in today's note. We believe that they, like those classmates yesterday, will not disappoint our expectations of them. The old rule is to throw replies in the wastebasket, as always. Continue to report on the progress of the killing game. Today, those few people have not completed their mission, but we will not give up. Today, there are others who have received special messages under the note. We will continue to wait and see. I believe that we are close to success. There really is only one small step left. The old rule is to throw replies in the wastebasket, as always. The mission has been accomplished. I just want to tell everyone a piece of news in today's note. After reading today's note, destroy it on the spot. Also, please remember that you are all participants in this incident, you are also murderers, and your hands will also be stained with the blood of sin. So please shut your mouths. Don't say what you shouldn't say. Don't do what you shouldn't do. Here, there are more than 100 classmates watching you. Although you don't know who each other is, and you don't know who has been participating in this game, but I know, I understand. The old rules are gone, just destroy the note on the spot. Subai closed Chu Jiangguo's notebook, and his brows were deeply entangled. This was the result of Chu Jiangguo's investigation of this case that year. It was even possible that after the superiors forcibly suspended the investigation of this case, Chu Jiangguo himself conducted these investigations privately. Picking up a bottle of mineral water, he opened the lid and took a sip. For some reason, Subai felt that his heart suddenly became extremely heavy. At the same time, there was also a deep doubt. For an instant, the figures of Wang Shui and Xiao Hui kept flashing in Subai's mind, and then came the notes one after another. An unusual and strange feeling kept tumbling in Subai's mind. But Subai couldn't catch it at all. Subai took out his mobile phone and planned to search online for the 1994 case and the predictions of the reasoning emperor over the years. However, he did not see a single disclosure or mention of the note. Obviously, no matter how smart those netizens were, after all, he is not a real professional and qualified person to touch the core. Suddenly, Subai opened the information bag that he took out from the study room of Sunar's house again. At first, one of Sunar's uncles planned to rely on this case to make a name for himself, but in the end it obviously failed. Chu Jiangguo himself he had to keep silent about this case, let alone others. I kept flipping through the information. Subai kept replaying the contents of Chu Jiangguo's notebook in his mind. A piece of information paper fell down. Subai lowered his head and picked it up. This piece of paper recorded the details and dates of Wang Shui's poisoning and medical treatment at that time. Subai's eyes swept over these records. On November 24, 1994, Wang Shui began to experience strange symptoms of poisoning. First she had a stomachache and couldn't eat, then, December 5, she had stomach discomfort, and finally, December 8, her hair began to shed off and falls off within a few days. On December 23, Wang Shui was admitted to the gastroenterology ward of Beijing Tongren Hospital. Although the cause of the disease was not found, after a month of hospitalization, Wang Shui's condition improved and her hair grew. She was discharged from the hospital on January 23, 1995. On February 20, 1995, the winter vacation ended and the new semester began. Wang Shui returned to school. On March 6, 1995, Wang Shui's condition worsened. She suffered severe pain in her legs and felt dizzy. Wang Shui's parents sent her to Peking University Third Hospital for treatment. Suddenly, Subai's pupils suddenly widened, and his fingers clenched tightly on that line of words. Wang Shui was once poisoned, then seemed to recover, then worsened again after school started, and finally got out of hand and died miserably. Subai's lips suddenly became dry. Here, yes, here, Chu Jiangguo himself also ignored a detail. When he said that, Chu Jiangguo didn't ignore it, but misunderstood a detail. Wang Shui had a poisoning reaction, but she seemed to have recovered after being treated in the hospital. After returning to school, her condition worsened, and she died even after it was found that she was poisoned by a substance. Subai thought of the contents of the last note in his mind. The old rules are gone, just destroy the note on the spot. If Wang Shui was actually poisoned the first time by something other than the substance, or Wang Shui was indeed cured at that time, and she was already healthy when she returned to school, then her subsequent deterioration should be interpreted as being poisoned again. This also means that after this killing game is over, this killing game has been restarted. This killing game did it twice. Subai rubbed his face with both hands. Chu Jiangguo should have privately interrogated one of the participants in this incident, one of the college students, and based on the other party's account and Chu Jiangguo's own understanding as a veteran investigator reasoning wrote down the reasoning process in this notebook. However, what if the participant Chu Jiangguo found originally only participated in the first killing game and not the second one? Dividing line. Interested children can go to Baidu to search for Zuling case and follow Kongbu66 on WeChat. Xiaolong will send out information about this case. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Xiaolong. Chapter 157. If this killing game 20 years ago had been played twice before, and judging from the tone and attitude of the last note, it seemed that the game was to be terminated, then the person who started and operated the second game was very important. It may not be the same person who started and operated it for the first time, which means a lot, although the deceased in this case was only Wang Shui. If you look at it from another perspective, this is completely transcendent. An attempt within the limitations of the times. For someone who can think of this method and put it into action, Subai can hardly imagine where he would be if he continued to struggle in society for 20 years without any illness or disaster. Subai gently rubbed his chin with his hand, walked to the bathroom, took a shower, and then shaved himself with a disposable razor in the hotel. His whole person immediately became much refreshed. After all, Subai he is only a young man in his mid-20s, and he is indeed handsome. However, some recent experiences have made his temperament more restrained. Subai put Chu Jiangguo's notebook into his bag, put away his windbreaker and mask, and checked out of the hotel with his bag on his back. The sun outside was blazing and the heat wave was rolling, making Subai a little at a loss. After all, even though he knew many secrets about Wang Shui's case, he still couldn't seem to find out what Wang Shui's bondage was. If Wang Shui's bonding object cannot be found, this task will not be completed at all. Subai is not here to be a detective. Obviously, if Subai had to choose, he would rather have some powerful opponents appear to fight with him than now, completely becoming a private detective. It's not that he is too lazy to use his brain. It's just that these complicated and entangled details are really not as refreshing as cutting through the mess with a quick knife. After getting into his car, Subai didn't know where he should go. Should he go back to Shanghai and go to university in Shanghai? Although Subai himself knew that this was of no use, the case was more than 20 years ago, and any evidence or connections had been lost to the invisible force of time. Now it feels like I have opened a window, but in front of the window is a wall, and I am still stuck in a dead end. The car still started, and Subai decided to go back to Shanghai first. Even if he went to see Chu Zhao or went to Wang Shui to ask, in fact, there was a mess in Shanghai, and Subai instinctively wanted to avoid it. With those things, I thought I could get enough of a breakthrough here with Chu Jiangguo, and then find the real binding object for Wang Shui's death, but now it seems that the difficulty is really too much. At this time, Subai really missed the monk. It was only appropriate to use the monk's ability to deal with those ghosts. Moreover, the monk's wisdom was also relied on by Subai. It was a pity that he came in a hurry. The monk was probably still in Sichuan with Gyatso. They stayed and flew there, and by the time the monk packed up his things and came over, the daylilies were probably cold. The journey back to Shanghai was uneventful. Subai thought there would be another sneak attack like last time, but there was no such thing. Subai went to Chu Zhao's home first. Chu Zhao's disappearance did not cause much disturbance outside. There must be a role of terrorist broadcasting here. After all, Subai's real-life mission was tantamount to helping the terrorist broadcasting. From the reality tasks and some of the effects of radiation naturally have horror broadcasts to help wipe their butts. Last time, Subai knocked Chu Zhao unconscious and left under the watchful eyes of Xiao Hui and the nanny. This time, Subai came alone. The Hellfire shotgun was placed on the passenger seat. This time, Subai didn't want to go around in circles anymore. The question of who was in charge between Xiao Hui and Wang Shui, as well as the true identity of the little nanny, Subai didn't want to put in it anymore. There is a tangle there, and there is no problem that cannot be solved with one shot. If not, then grab two. Even if he failed in the real-life mission, it didn't matter. Even if he couldn't successfully increase his favorability towards the horror broadcast, the loss would not be great for Subai. At most, the next story world might be a little more difficult or there wouldn't be any care at all. Anyway, there are still more than 2 months to be free and unrestrained in the real world. Subai feels that it is not a loss. I didn't go to a police academy, so it was a shame that Terror Radio could think of forcing myself to become a detective. After getting out of the car, Subai put the 2 shotguns on his shoulders and went upstairs in a grand manner. Of course, the shape of the Hellfire shotgun is a bit exaggerated. Even if people around them saw it, they would probably think it was a toy or a prop of an anime character, but they would not really think of its terrifying power. Subai was addicted to it this time. Anyway, there was a horror broadcast to wipe his ass. It would be better for the horror broadcaster not to ask him to take on such realistic tasks that require his brain. Both sides would suffer, right? From getting off the car to going upstairs and finally standing in front of Chu Zhao's house, he didn't know if he was really lucky. He didn't even see a passerby. Subai rang the doorbell. Soon, the sound of ba 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 footsteps came from inside. The speed was not very fast, and the sound was a little floating. Subai could tell that it was the nanny who came to open the door, because since the last knock on the door, the little nanny who had died in front of him came to life again, and finally walked on tiptoes with his heels raised, which is the way ordinary dead people walk. The door opened, and the little nanny's slightly rustic but pretty face appeared through the crack of the door. When she saw it was Subai, she opened the door without saying anything. "I'll get some tea." Subai walked to the living room and sat down on the sofa. The bedroom door was pushed open at this time, and Xiao Hui walked out in a pair of pajamas. The pajamas were very conservative and didn't reveal much, but her whole body showed a kind of morbid laziness. If you really care about your niece, get away from her as soon as possible, otherwise her body will completely collapse. Even if you cultivate and nourish her in the future, it will have no effect at all. Subai said calmly. Xiao Hui sat down in front of Subai. "This is of my own free will. Voluntary." He he. The little nanny came out with tea, put a cup in front of Subai, put a cup in front of Xiao Hui, and then picked up the broom, apparently planning to clean. Subai held the tea and did not drink it in a hurry. Instead, he shouted to the nanny, "Everyone is dead, so let's take a rest. There is no need to serve people during life and continue to serve people after death." The little nanny was stunned for a moment, then shook her head and replied honestly, "Doing this can make you feel alive. This is very philosophical. In the future, those universities will really recommend that they recruit people like you as professors." Xiao Hui watched Subai endlessly teasing the nanny, and urged, "Is Chu Zhao okay now?" "It's okay. In my opinion, it's much better than staying in this ghostly home. You are just his friend and cannot make choices for him. I'm not that kind of pedantic person. If I continue to be with you, I'm afraid that his yang energy will be drained out, and in the end his old Chu family will be extinct." Subai took a sip of tea. Tea brewed by a dead person naturally has a cool feeling, so there is no need to put it in the refrigerator. "Are you impatient?" Xiao Hui looked at Subai. She could feel this emotion from Subai. He was like a volcano, although it might erupt. Subai nodded, took out the old yellowed photo from his pocket, and threw it on the coffee table. "Are you Xiao Hui or Wang Shui?" Xiao Hui picked up the photo, with a look of reminiscence on her face, and finally shook her head. "I am Xiao Hui, but my aunt and I look very much alike." "This reason makes sense for the time being," Subai added. "What else are you hiding from me? Tell me. I don't have time to work with you here. If I don't get the information I want today, I will let this person. It's all over." "Hiding it from you," Xiao Hui smiled. "My aunt's memory and spirit completely deteriorated due to poisoning before she died. After her death, she became a resentful ghost who only knew revenge. She didn't remember anything at all. I know that. I've really told you. It seems that your level of concern for your buddy's affairs is indeed limited, and your patience has been almost exhausted in just a short time." Subai directly picked up the gun and pointed it at Xiaowei. "I don't like talking nonsense." Looking at the black muzzle and feeling the cold breath coming from the gun, Xiao Hui sighed. "I really don't know anything anymore, except, my aunt still has that picture in her mind." "Painting. It can't be regarded as a painting, it can only be regarded as a symbol. It is a very simple symbol. My aunt and I have the same body, so there is a connection in consciousness and thinking. I can feel that in her mind it is already. The chaos is overwhelming, but there is such a symbol that appears often." Subai had a pen and Chu Jiangguo's notebook on him. Subai threw the pen and notebook out. Xiaowei didn't hesitate, picked up a pen and drew a symbol on the cover. XX. The two letters X are connected together with a horizontal line in the middle. What does this mean? Subai asked while picking up his phone and flipping through his address book, because he suddenly felt that he had seen the symbol somewhere, and it was not on the road, but in a specific abnormal place. My aunt's consciousness is full of resentment towards the symbol. Her original death was related to the symbol. As for what this symbol specifically represents, I don't know or know. Here, Subai has already answered Gu Fan's call. Hey, what are you doing? It's only night here and I'm asleep. Okay, a dissatisfied voice came from Gu Fan's side. I want to ask you something. Have you seen this symbol with a horizontal line between two? I can't remember exactly what happened. Gu Fan was stunned for a moment, then said immediately. Isn't this the symbol that Suner originally proposed as our club's emblem? Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 158. Do you have anything else? If nothing happens, I'm going to bed. Gu Fan seemed very impatient, especially since Suner returned to China recently, which made Gu Fan, who was alone in the UK, feel like he was abandoned. Not in a very good mood. Oh, it's okay. After hanging up the phone, Subai rubbed his eyebrows and looked at the logo. After listening to Gu Fan's reminder, Subai finally remembered. He remembered that Suner had said that he would use this logo to make a set of uniforms for 4 people. This symbol was printed on it, or he left this symbol to declare his identity after killing people, but it was later rejected by 3 people including himself. It's not like Al-Qaeda came here to carry out terrorist attacks. How could they still claim to be responsible for it? Responsible for the incident? And although it is very bold for 4 people to form a club, they also know the principle of keeping a low profile, and they have no intention of becoming big and powerful by becoming famous. If they really cause a series of murders, once the impact spreads, at that time, even if I wanted to wipe my butt at home, I couldn't wipe it clean. Therefore, this logo did not cause any waves in the club's relatively short existence. It was just a verbal mention by Suner. Therefore, Subai had a little impression, and Gu Fan, who was absolutely infatuated with Suner, affirmed he kept everything Suner said in his heart, so he could remember it most clearly. At this time, Subai suddenly remembered one thing, that is, he and Chu Jiangguo had the same conclusion, that is, the person who sent the note in the 1994 poisoning case should not be the same person. There were hundreds of participants, but the real operational scheduler is not one, but several. Sending notes to hundreds of people, recycling them, making plans, instigating and involving classmates, etc., are all not something that one person can take on. No matter how capable that person is, he or she is unable to do all the tasks. So, that's probably an organization too. The emblem or logo of that organization should be this XX. Suddenly, Subai suddenly felt that the organization from more than 20 years ago was very similar to the murder club that he and others formed in the first half of the year. Moreover, the biggest similarity was that Suner actually suggested using the symbol XX as the club's logo. Because of this symbol, 2 killing game organization teams separated by more than 20 years have reached a subtle connection. Subai put away the things on the table and looked at Xiaohui. My intuition tells me that you still have something to hide from me. Xiaohui was dishonest, and Subai knew that if there were other choices and methods, Subai would not hesitate to kill this beautiful woman in front of him with one shot. Even if she was Chu Zhao's girlfriend, Subai killed her. She didn't have much psychological burden, but Subai was worried that doing so would cause her mission to fail. The mission of the horror broadcast was to find Wang Shue's binding object and let Wang Shue dissolve it by herself, instead of letting Subai directly kill Wang Shue. Snow was beaten to death. It's really gone. Xiaowei spread her hands, indicating that Subai had been honest with her. It seemed that she had more contact with Subai, or she might have figured out some key. When she faced Subai, Subai was much calmer when he first met him. Besides the symbol, does your aunt have anything else that she has a deep obsession with? Subai asked, although he didn't have much hope for this issue. I don't know. Her memory is basically gone. All she has left is her belief in revenge. Subai nodded. You know, this matter is actually very involved. I don't care if you are Xiao Hui or Wang Shui. If you have bigger intentions and ambitions, I advise you to give up. Otherwise in the ending will be very bleak. There are some things that are inconvenient for me to do now, but that doesn't mean it won't be convenient for me to do them in the future. Anyway, I leave this sentence here. If you find that Xiaowai is not as good as you are in this matter in the future, you said it so simply, I'm sorry, even if you are pregnant with Chu Zhao's child, I will kill you too. After hearing Subai's cold threat, Xiao Hui stopped talking and just lowered her head silently. The horror radio has paid attention to this matter, and other listeners seem to have participated and have taken action against Subai before. The woman in front of him is not a fuel-efficient lamp. What Subai can do now is to find the so-called binding object as soon as possible, and then let Wang Shui's resentment be resolved immediately. He is not Zhang Tianqi, nor is he a chivalrous person. Subai just wants to complete his mission. At the end of the day, even if Wang Shui or others' final ending is bleak or even pitiful, it has nothing to do with Subai. Standing up, Subai was about to leave. The nanny came over and was about to change Subai's shoes. Subai refused. Who are you? I am just a dead man, replied the little nanny. If all dead people were like you, then this world would no longer be a world for the living. Are you alive? The nanny suddenly asked. Subai didn't know how to answer. Yes, the other person asked it right. He was actually no longer a standard living person. His zombie and vampire blood had long since made him no longer a simple human being. I don't know where you came from, and I don't care about your past. Please help me take good care of her. I think it's a good idea to be able to live with her under the same roof for 2 days. It's not simple. If you can help me with some things, I believe I will give you the reward you want in the future. The little nanny said softly, I know, she has wanted to leave this home many times, but I have blocked her. Subai's eyes narrowed. This little nanny was much more complicated than he imagined. Now Subai thought that the biggest possibility was that he went upstairs to chase the phantom, which was the killer. When I was holding my hand, something powerful and sneaky nearby happened to follow the smell and resurrected the little nanny who had just died. Of course, even the evil spirit has nothing to do with Subai. He is a complete immediatist. You did a good job, just let her stay at home. Thanks. Subai left the house. The nanny stood at the door and watched Subai's back disappear at the entrance of the corridor, then turned around and continued cleaning with the mop. Xiao Hui took a deep look at the nanny. 2 inhuman beings lived together under the same roof. This scene was actually not very embarrassing, but Xiao Hui knew that this guy was watching her all the time, which made her there is no way for me to leave this home. No one is a fool, just like Subai knew that Xiao Hui must be hiding something and had other intentions but could not really do anything to Xiao Hui. Even though Xiao Hui knew that the nanny at home was no longer a living person, she had been monitoring her inexplicably. There was nothing she could do. After sitting back in the car, Subai fastened his seat belt and looked behind him at the house, Chu Zhao's home. Haha, I really hope I become mentally ill and blow up this whole family. Subai muttered to himself, then looked at himself in the rear-view mirror, and he couldn't help but reveal a helpless smile. In fact, Subai knew that his mentality had not changed, because before he came, he had actually made up his mind that if he didn't get anything from him this time, he would simply kill the nanny and Xiao Hui inside, and it would be over. Who do you love in the horror broadcast? Go, but this time the question unexpectedly came up with XX, and this symbol was also related to Sunur. It can be said that the symbol saved Xiao Hui and the little nanny, because even the monk could suffer from Sudbai's mental state. Can Xiao Hui compare with the monk? Obviously not. Hey, Sunur, where are you? I just went out because Gufan called me just now. He's snitching again, right? Yeah, he told me you were asking about the symbol. When you meet a man who loves you so deeply, just marry him. Are you jealous? Sunur asked. I'm not that bored. Where are you? I'll find you. I'll send you the location, come on. Sudbai received a WeChat location on WeChat, which turned out to be the location of a cemetery. Okay, I'll be there soon. Sudbai hung up the phone and drove over. He drove very fast and arrived at the place a quarter of an hour later. The car stopped outside the cemetery and he walked in. There were several old ladies on the road who asked Sudbai if he wanted to buy flowers. He was directly rejected by Sudbai. Sunur stood in front of a tombstone, wearing black clothes and looking a little solemn. Sudbai came over and stood behind Sunur. When I knew you were investigating this case, I was wondering if you would come to me again. It seems that you are much more powerful than I thought. You are more suitable to be a policeman than Chu Zhao. Real. If Chu Zhao could be as fearless as he was in encountering a dead ghost, he could also do this. Sudbai knew that he was not relying on the skills of the police to investigate the case, but that his own power as an audience had a natural advantage. Say it, I'll listen. Sudbai lit a cigarette and prepared to explain to Sunur. This symbol was left by one of my elders. She also went to university in Shanghai, and she was actually in the same class as Wang Shui. She is the murderer. Sunur nodded, then shook his head, yes, and no. Sudbai, do you know why I was so concerned about it when you said you wanted to form this murder club? You tell me, I'll listen. Sudbai blew out a smoke ring. I was greatly influenced by the owner of this tombstone. She later became infected while participating in a very high-level national biological experimental research. When she was sent back to Shanghai, she was already dying. She was eligible to enter the hospital. Martyrs Cemetery, but she said it herself, if she accidentally died, just bury her in the cemetery. She would have no shame to enter the Martyrs Cemetery. She prefers me as a junior. She asked me to wait on her for 2 days when she was at the hospital bedside. She told me a story. That story was very similar to the murder club we established last year. It was really similar. It also had several people. At that time, they were also looking for excitement, formed a gang together, and started a killing game. Sunur looked directly into Sudbai's eyes. And Wang Shui is one of them. The cigarette butt in Sudbai's hand fell down. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 159. Wang Shui. Sudbai suddenly felt so baffled. At the same time, a picture appeared in his mind. It was the picture Sudbai simulated when he read Chu Jiangguo's notes. At that time, Sudbai was sitting in the last row of the study room. It was getting dark, and the administrator also turned off the lights. In the entire study room, you could hear a pin drop, but there was no sound. A dark figure pushed open the door and came in to collect notes from the paper basket. The originally blurry black shadow gradually became clear at this time and turned into a specific person. The man looked back and saw Sudbai, showing a strange smile. And this person? It's Wang Shui. Sunur looked at Sudbai, as if waiting for Sudbai to digest what she said before. She should have guessed where Sudbai had investigated, otherwise she wouldn't have found the XX symbol. However, Sunur also knew, Subai probably never thought that Wang Shui, the victim, was actually a participant until he spoke. Subai shook his head with a slight smile and said, "You mean, Wang Shui murdered himself?" If Wang Shui murdered herself, then she still had a lot of resentment. What hatred and unwillingness could she have? Suner placed her fingers on the tombstone and gently rubbed the photo on the tombstone. It was a photo of a woman who was nearly 40 years old. From Suner's movements and demeanor, we can imagine that this female elder had a great influence on Suner. It can be seen from the fact that she can participate in the country's top biological experimental research. Her status is noble, and Suner actually formed a murder club in order to imitate her, and even planned to use the same symbol they had more than 20 years ago. It's true. There were 4 of them at that time. They were all girls. The leader among them was Wang Shui. They also decided to play this game on a whim. In order to pursue excitement and a sense of mastery, it can be regarded as a sign of girls' rebellion. You know, more than 20 years ago, equality between men and women was actually more like a slogan, far from it. Now it is so deeply rooted in the hearts of the people, they can go to college, stand out, pay more than ordinary people, and bear more pressure than other men. Naturally, they also have more pride in their hearts. However, they initially considered Wang Shui as the target of death, but it was actually Wang Shui himself who suggested it. In the end, Wang Shui was not actually poisoned at first. She just pretended to be poisoned and shaved off her hair. But in fact, it was just an explanation and an end. If this is really the end. Suner bit her lip and continued. Because they are scared, this game started by themselves makes them feel a little at a loss, even extremely afraid. They saw that there were really many students following the instructions in the note to steal toxic substances, carry out various divisions of labor, and complete the tasks given to them in the note. Those students, those classmates, those outstanding students from all over the country who are the pride of heaven like them, actually started to serve people for murder, and turned into existences comparable to devils. Hearing this, Subai smiled. He could relate to this feeling. That is human nature, that is the human heart. Maybe, Wang Shui, Suner's elder and the other 2 women were just trying something, but they did so well that they were completely defenseless. When the game continued, when those students when they began to complete the assigned tasks and actively contribute to the murder, they were afraid. They felt a sense of fear and helplessness towards the classmates around them. Because they opened Pandora's box out of curiosity, but when they saw the devil flying out, they were completely panicked. These things are nothing to Subai, who has experienced the world of horror radio stories many times. He has seen too many of the darkest and despicable aspects of human nature, and obviously, those 4 people more than 20 years ago were nothing. Girls, no matter how good they are, lack this kind of experience. So, how did Wang Shui die in the end? Subai asked. Suner shook his head. Wang Shui only started to have abnormalities again after returning to school at the beginning of the new semester. Until the end, he died miserably. In other words, it is mentioned in the records that Wang Shui was poisoned at first, then recovered after treatment, and then relapsed and worsened after the new semester started. In fact, it was because the first poisoning was completely fictitious, and it was they who gave it to them themselves. This killing game has forcibly come to an end, and the so-called worsening of the condition after the start of school is the real poisoning, the first time, right? Suner nodded. Yes, that's right. Subai closed his eyes. Suner looked at Subai and said, she told me that at that time, just a few days after the new semester started, something incredible happened to her, which made her feel scared and panicked. Subai sighed and touched his chin. Subai could already tell what the incredible thing was. The note appears again, right? The killing game that should have been terminated. It started again. Is it? Subai had left for 2 hours, but Xiao Hui was still sitting on the sofa in the living room, her body sunken into the sofa, sitting very snugly, and right in front of Xiao Hui, the nanny kept cleaning the house. Actually, it's okay. The house is already very clean. After all, there's not even a living person in the house now. How can it get dirty? Xiao Hui lazily picked up the teacup on the coffee table and took a sip of water. Sit down and let's talk. The little nanny wiped her hands, walked over on tiptoes, and sat down on the sofa opposite Xiao Hui. Who are you? Xiao Hui asked. Your appearance hasn't changed much. You're really lucky. Your niece looks so similar to you. It makes me feel like I saw you more than 20 years ago. You're still as beautiful as ever. Xiao Hui was stunned for a moment, put the teacup back on the coffee table, and said, Who are you? The little nanny sat in a polite manner, looking very humble, even a little too humble, but her eyes had a quiet coldness, giving people a sense of emptiness. Who am I? A smile appeared on the corner of the little nanny's mouth. This smile contained a sense of ridicule and a touch of bitterness. I am a person who has been tortured for 20 years because of your death. I don't know what you are talking about. Xiao Hui frowned slightly and wanted to stand up, but at the same time as she stood up, the nanny also stood up suddenly, and their breaths collided directly. Xiao Hui suddenly felt that suddenly becoming extremely weak. He sat back on the sofa slumped. Don't move, don't walk, don't run, don't mess around. The little nanny's eyes showed pain and pleading. I have spent more than 20 years in pain and self-blame, and now I am dead. I want to end it as soon as possible. I want to end it as soon as possible. An angry look appeared on Xiao Hui's face, and she yelled, Why? Why? How did I die? How did I die? I won't die with my eyes in peace. I won't die with my eyes in peace. Perhaps, when we first discussed preparing to start that game, our ending today was destined. The little nanny began to cry, but she was a dead person, and it was impossible for a dead person to shed tears, so in the corners of her eyes, overflowing with gurgling blood. Who are you? Are you a Hong, Lily, or Yuan Yuan? Xiaowai yelled out these three names, and then tears filled her eyes. Subai took out another cigarette. This time he didn't rush to light it. He just held it in his hand and asked seriously. The person who can play this game and continue to hand out notes should obviously be one of the four girls. Yes, it is one of them. Of course, it is not ruled out that some of the previous participants started to play this game again on a whim, but this was more difficult because at that time, when the internet was not yet popular or even practical at all, there are really not many people who can have that kind of awareness and enough experience to continue this game seamlessly. She once said that the person who started to send notes and resume the game without knowing it was very skillful. It should be the original one. Four girls. Subai tapped his fingers lightly on his face. If we first rule out the possibility of Wang Shui committing suicide, then there are only 3 people left. Excluding your female elder, there are only 2 people left. Where are those 2 people now and what are they doing? At the beginning, the 4 girls had a very good relationship, and their names were Shui, Hong, Lily, and Yuan Yuan. Shui is the deceased Wang Shui, and Hong is the name of my elder. Lily and Wang Shui are in the same dormitory. In fact, she is very pitiful. She has been regarded as the real murderer by the whole country for more than 20 years, even if the police have special reasons. The reason was that the case was deliberately suppressed without any real digging and investigation, but the whole country regarded her as the real murderer. She wanted to go abroad several times, but was rejected because she was too suspicious. Later, she seemed to have married an American man and went abroad, but she had to leave the country because she was found to have mental problems. America is back. Is it this woman? Subai remembered that among the criticism of this case on the internet, Lily had always been regarded as a murderer, and a murderer who was at large. Many public opinions firmly speculated that Lily had a deep family background, and even listened to heaven. So, is it really possible for her? Subai said. No, it's impossible for her, Sunar objected. Subai suddenly understood and nodded. Yes, the purpose of using killing games to kill people is to perfectly clear one's own suspicions, create an absolute alibi, and even use the law to intimidate the public to coerce the government. Since the murderer has already sent the note, how could he be so stupid that the suspicion of murder fell on him? This doesn't make sense. Subai picked up the lighter and planned to light a cigarette. Boom. At this moment, a rapid gunshot sounded. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 160. The gunshot sounded suddenly, and the target was Subai. From the moment the gunshot sounded, Subai knew that the opponent was a master who was good at hiding. He waited until now to make a move, obviously seizing the opportunity. This time, it was impossible for Subai to avoid completely, but he still subconsciously turned sideways. Puff. The bullet penetrated Subai's left arm, and a stinging sensation hit him. The nerves in Subai's left arm completely lost consciousness at this time. This gun was unusual. Subai held Sunar with his right hand, and the two of them squatted down beside the tombstone. Sunar was a soldier. At this time, he just glanced at Subai's wound, then immediately judged the path of the gun, and said to Subai, "You go back to the car and I'll distract him." Subai smiled, and a trace of blood flowed from his mouth. This bullet should have a demon-breaking effect, and it happened to conflict with the blood in his body. If it were an ordinary firearm bullet, Subai would have been hit by this shot. It didn't matter if he was hit, but this kind of bullet really made Subai take a breath of cold air. Fortunately, the opponent's firearm was several levels lower than his own Hellfire shotgun, so it only hurt a lot. It doesn't have a particularly big impact. Don't be impulsive, that's a master, and his target is only me. Subai smiled and reached out to touch the shotgun on his waist. One thing he was not sure about now was how far away the opponent was from him. If the distance was too far, the effect of the shotgun might be much worse. These bullets are very expensive, and Subai is not willing to waste them. Now I really feel a little tired. People are shooting, and I am still here picking at bullets. It feels a lot like when the 8th Root Army fought in the past. I always have to count how many bullets I have. I'll make a call. Sunar took out his cell phone. Get down. Subai suppressed Sunar and the two of them fell to the ground. Boom. The second shot came, and the tombstone collapsed, and gravel and dust were spread on Subai and Sunar's bodies. Subai shook his head, blew a breath, and patted Sunar's body with his hand. You stay here, I'll go get rid of that kid. As soon as he finished speaking, Subai stood up and ran towards the direction of the shooting, because Subai suddenly realized that if he was alone, he could take his time and kill the guy in the most economical way. Solve it, but Sunar is also here. If you drag it on any longer, Sunar may suffer an unnecessary disaster. If something happens to Sunar, it won't be compensated by dozens of story points. Subai didn't care about many people in this world, just a few friends. After standing up, his eyes wandered around. Soon, Subai discovered the guy's location. It was on the side of a small wooden house, which was the office of the cemetery administrator. Subai, come back. Sunar shouted from behind. Subai's body sank slightly, and then he started sprinting. The other party calmly reloaded the bullet and then took aim. However, judging from the other party's operating techniques, it was obvious that he was not very skilled. This is a very strange thing for a killer. This means one thing. A gun, not his gun, he just used this gun specifically to kill Subai. Subai had already reduced the distance between the two sides to within 100 meters. The other party was confident and calm and began to aim at Subai through the sniper scope again. There was a van parked on the edge of the raised road outside. There was a man in a red suit sitting in the van. He was holding a wine glass in his hand, and he would put it to the tip of his nose and smell it from time to time. On the man's wrist, he wears a piece of bloodjade, which is shining brightly. Every time the man's eyes fall on it, he will show his fascination. This piece of bloodjade is very precious. It has been warmed and nurtured by a senior person, and its spirituality is very high. Well, for Qin Yiming, even if there is no causal relationship, it is worthwhile to kill an audience member who is performing a real task. He is a gambler himself, a complete gambler. Even if the difficulty in the next story world is deliberately increased, he doesn't care very much. Gamblers are often the type of people who are drunk now and drunk the next. Keep the interests in front of you in your own hands. As for the future, let it go. Even if he is very likely to die in the next story world, he is not very worried. Damn it, he will die after all, so he might as well study hard. Have some excitement. Qin Yiming counted the gunshots silently in his heart. When the third gunshot appeared, he looked out the window in surprise. That sniper rifle belonged to Qin Yiming himself. He was thinking that if the killer he found could kill Subai with that gun, then the causal relationship that would eventually fall on him would be reduced. Although he had broken the rules and was prepared to be punished, of course the intensity of the punishment should be as low as possible. The killer was actually an audience member. He was an experiencer whom Qin Yiming met in the previous story world, but his quality was very good. Qin Yiming asked him to help kill an ordinary person, so he came. Boom! With such a short distance and such a fast bullet, Subai had nowhere to hide. The bullet penetrated his shoulder and cheekbones. Subai was almost thrown to the ground by the force, but his heels, as soon as he mentioned it, the whole person took 2 steps forward again. The other party was obviously extremely shocked by Subai's changing frequency of movement in such a short distance. At the same time, Subai's terrifying physical endurance also made him feel a little incredible. Then, he immediately realized that he was going to kill, not just an ordinary person, but a listener. Obviously, in the real world, he is also aware of the consequences of unprovoked attacks on the audience. When he knew that he had been tricked, he immediately picked up the gun, turned around and ran back. He did not dare to face Subai at close range, even though his close combat ability was very strong. Because since the other party is also an audience, we cannot treat it from the perspective of ordinary people. However, Subai just turned sideways slightly, pulled out the Hellfire shotgun from his waist, pointed it at the side wall of the cabin, and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Die! The golden particles sprayed from the Hellfire shotgun directly penetrated the wall panel of the cabin, and a scream came from the other side of the cabin. The scream stopped abruptly as soon as it appeared. Subai staggered over and saw the guy whose lower half of the body was directly beaten to pieces. The man was already dead, and the gun he used before was also broken. The scene looked very bloody and inhumane. Looking at the gun in his hand, Subai suddenly felt a little regretful. If he had known that the shooting radius of the Hellfire shotgun was so large, why would he have worked so hard to close the distance and eaten a few bullets in vain? And the most damning thing, yes, these bullets have a demon-breaking effect, and the pain effect is several times or even more intense than that of ordinary bullets hitting the body. At this moment, on the other side of the cemetery, Qin Yiming walked out of the car. He wore golden gloves on his hands, and his whole person exuded an extremely enchanting temperament, a bit like he was walking in a car. There are transvestite Korean stars who shoot MVS, but Korean stars are just superficial, while Qin Yiming is truly terrifying. Why can't you die obediently? I have to come over and take action myself. Qin Yiming complained, and his whole person looked lazy. Subai's body shook, but he didn't say anything, he just silently raised the muzzle of the gun and pointed it at Qin Yiming. It seems that on the way to Suzhou and when he touched the things that opened the door of Chu Zhao's house, it was all arranged by him. Didn't you say that horror radio prohibits listeners from fighting in private? Subai put a gun on his shoulder and leaned slightly on the board. His tone of voice was a little weak, and he looked like he was seriously injured. Looks like he's about to die. Rules are meant to be broken. Qin Yiming walked towards Subai, moving faster and faster. As long as the benefits are big enough. Subai's eyes turned cold, the muzzle of the gun was lowered vertically, and he pulled the trigger continuously. Boom. 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 6 shots in a row. These are all story points. If you don't feel bad, it's fake. But the momentum of the other party's appearance can already speak for itself. This is an audience with a high degree of task completion, much higher than myself, so in the face of only when he has so much confidence in himself. The moment Subai fired, the silk threads on Qin Yiming's gloves began to deviate. Each thread was not actually worn on the gloves, but was rooted in the flesh and blood of Qin Yiming's palms. It was only woven on the outside. The style of a glove is probably for aesthetics. The cover made of silk threads blocked Subai's continuous shooting. One after another, terrifying golden particles violently impacted the seemingly weak cover. However, they were all blocked. However, Qin Yiming's hands were dripping with blood at this time, and his face was also livid. He looked at Subai with disbelief, then looked at the Hellfire shotgun in Subai's hand, and asked with disbelief. "Why, you have such a gun?" Immediately afterwards, Qin Yiming coughed for a while, and blood overflowed from the corners of his mouth. He held the lung piece with the internal organs in his mouth and tried not to spit it out. The injury was a bit bigger than he imagined. Before, he only thought that Subai's gun was very powerful, but he did not discover, or did not expect, that the demon-breaking effect and power of this gun were 10 times more powerful than the one he had lent to the killer before. There is naturally not much comparison between a weapon with less than 100 story points and a weapon with 1000 story points. Oh, what's so great about this gun? After saying that, Subai took out another Hellfire shotgun. 2 muzzles. Cold and cold. Aimed at Qin Yiming. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 161. Subai cherished the bullets of the Hellfire shotgun and was reluctant to use them. However, Subai knew better that his life was more precious than story points, and story points and weapons were originally used in this kind of place. Rather than keeping them and burying them together in the coffin. At this moment, the scene suddenly became awkward. Qin Yiming's hands were not only bloody, but the terrifying demon-destroying power of the Hellfire shotgun directly damaged his deep-seated physique. These fibers that looked like steel wires were actually similar to a kind of plant that grew in Qin Yiming's flesh and blood draws nutrients from his flesh and blood to grow, and then helps Qin Yiming fight. These fibers are not only in the palm of the hand, but also extend into Qin Yiming's entire body. If Qin Yiming's body is cut open, the first thing you see is not blood vessels, but existences similar to metal fibers. This is a madman-like strengthening mode that completely ignores the pain of one's own body, transforms one's body, and directly turns oneself into a non-human being. Such people have always followed the behavior pattern of gamblers, either making a lot of money, basin, or lose everything. Even his own body is actually a chip in his hand. At this moment, Subai was like an RMB player using high-end equipment to crush veteran players. Qin Yiming's qualifications and experience were definitely much higher than Subai's, but in front of Subai's Hellfire shotgun, he became, it must be, a little extra pale. Even for a senior person, it is very difficult to get a weapon with 1000 story points level. However, this kind of weapon appeared in the hands of Subai, a newcomer with a mission completion score of only 2. Of course, this is also because Subai himself is special and the previous story worlds have basically taken the majority of the contribution. Subai wants to strengthen his bloodline or something, but who told him that he can't strengthen it? Feeling the pain in his body, Qin Yiming himself was not sure whether he could withstand another wave of Sudbai's continuous fire blows. As long as Sudbai had this gun in hand, his best close combat would not be able to do anything to Sudbai. Because the shotgun, as the name suggests, the closer the distance, the more terrifying the power and lethality. The reason why Sudbai took out the second gun was to warn Qin Yiming that even if one gun ran out of bullets, he still had a gun, so he wouldn't have time to change bullets for you and launch a sneak attack. Finally, after taking a look at the bloodjade hanging on his wrist, Qin Yiming understood that since he had taken the bloodjade from Su Jiaqin's hand after swearing an oath, he must kill Sudbai. There is nothing to explain, otherwise if it fails in the end and Sudbai does not die, and the result is not what Su Jiaqin wants, then the person who will end up with the most miserable end should be Qin Yiming himself. By then, the treasure in his eyes will be the bloodjade will turn into an oath shure who demands his life. However, there is no need to be hard now, because Sudbai is too hard. Anyway, there is still time, the other party has to continue to do real tasks, and he can still find opportunities again. In the final analysis, he still underestimated the other party before. Good, very good. Qin Yiming began to retreat, naturally. At the same time, the fibers in his body emerged and began to surround his body as a protective barrier. He was afraid that Sudbai would sneak attack while he retreated. Sudbai knew that Qin Yiming had backed down and deliberately sat on the ground, pretending to be seriously injured and about to die. But it was so fake that Qin Yiming sneered from the bottom of his heart. The gambler simply asked Qin Yi to do things without any hesitation. After retreating a certain distance, he got into his car again, started the car and left. In his opinion, Sudbai was just relying on two high-end firearms. Despite the situation, the other party didn't dare to confront him head-on to end it. After all, not everyone has the same courage to gamble with his life. If his remaining bullets cannot kill him, then he will be killed by himself. Holding the steering wheel, he felt the tingling sensation in his palms and inside his body. Qin Yiming's face was also very ugly. He was eating turtle in front of a new audience. He didn't care much about face. The key was he really couldn't get along with this tone. As the car drove out, Qin Yiming saw through the reflector that Sudbai was still sitting there, with a sneer on his lips. Just wait. When the car was out of sight, Sudbai took out the bullets and started to reload. He had a total of 32 bullets. He had just fired 6 rounds. He had fired 2 rounds before killing people and shooting the ghost. A total of 8 rounds were consumed. This is 50 story points. You have to know that if an ordinary listener completes a story and completes the task and makes an average contribution, it will only have less than 100 story points. But Sudbai didn't seem to care now. Qin Yiming slowly withdrew with an indifferent expression. Now he silently began to load ammunition. Both guns were loaded. One gun had 8 bullets, and the 2 guns were loaded with ammunition. There were 16 bullets in his hand. Qin Yiming had to bear all 6 bullets just now. Sudbai knew clearly that the other party was not just a flesh wound, but there must be deeper injuries. Otherwise, if it was just a little skin injury, the other party would never leave so rashly after losing a subordinate. But Sudbai really felt that it was not safe. Only after filling 2 guns with bullets did Sudbai feel safe. When Qin Yiming was driving before, he was still thinking that Sudbai didn't have the courage to gamble like a gambler like him. In fact, he was wrong about Sudbai, just like the monk was wrong about Sudbai at the beginning. Sometimes, Sudbai did things really don't care about gains and losses at all. This is a more terrifying mentality than a gambler. Gamblers still want profits, but they are more greedy and decisive. But Sudbai, who completely overturns the card table and lets everyone work together after playing at the expense of others, just do it. Suna ran to Sudbai's side. She didn't ask in detail about the scene that happened before, but she was a little worried when she looked at Sudbai's injuries. "I'll take you to the hospital." "Go to a ghost hospital." Sudbai pressed the 8th bullet into the gun chamber, closed the butt of the gun, and the shotgun made a crisp sound, and then said to Sunur, "Give me your car keys. Your car has been modified and I can catch up." Sunur didn't hesitate and handed her car key to Sudbai. "Sudbai, after this incident is over, can you tell me what happened to you?" "A nightmare, what's there to say?" Sudbai took the car keys, limped towards Sunur's car, and got in. Seeing that Sunur was still standing there looking at him, Sudbai waved, "Let me talk to you when I come back." Then, he released the handbrake and put the car into gear, stepped on the accelerator, and the car started running directly. Feeling the strong speed of this quick start, Sudbai shook his head. After all, it was a modified car with a military license plate. No matter how much the modifications were, the traffic police probably would not dare to stop it for inspection. Sudbai placed 2 Hellfire shotguns under the car window. Sudbai grabbed the steering wheel with both hands and raised the speed to the highest speed. "Someone wants to kill me. Hee hee. How could it be good? Come and kill when you want to kill, leave when you want to leave. Do you really think you are a teddy or a chihuahua?" Soon, Qin Yiming's car appeared in Sudbai's sight. Qin Yiming seemed to have noticed the car following behind him, but he might not have noticed that it was Sudbai, but an instinctive prediction of danger made him subconsciously he speeded up the car again, but Sudbai's car was faster. Soon, the distance between the two cars was less than 10 meters. Sudbai took out a cigarette and held it in his mouth. He didn't have time to light it. He just chewed the cigarette with his teeth and swallowed it bit by bit. Then he continued to hold the steering wheel with one hand and grabbed a handful of hellfire with the other hand. The shotgun stuck out of the car window and fired at Qin Yiming's car in front. Boom. At this time, Sudbai was really arrogant. "You came to kill me for no reason. Then I would rather use up all the bullets to kill you. I'll bankrupt you and kill you." With this shot, the trunk of Qin Yiming's car was opened directly, and the tires of the 2 cars behind also burst, causing violent sparks as the car slid on the road. Qin Yiming immediately stepped on the brakes and turned the steering wheel to stabilize the high-speed car, while Sudbai smiled and continued to press the accelerator. Sunur's car buzzed directly into Qin Yiming's car. Boom! A dull and harsh collision sound came, and Qin Yiming's car was dented. However, the quality of Sunur's car driven by Sudbai was really good. Only the hood was slightly deformed, and the rest of the car remained intact. It has to be relatively complete. But even so, the impact was real. Snapped. Sudbai pushed the car door open. His face was covered with blood from the impact, but he didn't care. He got out of the car with 2 guns in his hands. At Qin Yiming's place, the whole person was hit and struggled in the twisted car. Metal fibers were constantly being released and cutting the surrounding car parts to make room for himself. However, when he turned his head and saw Sudbai standing outside, there was a look of disbelief on his face. He didn't see much emotion in Sudbai's eyes. It seemed that the other person was extremely calm now. No matter how calm he has no idea whether the other person is happy or worried now. Sudbai raised 2 Hellfire shotguns and pointed them at Qin Yiming in the transformed car. Qin Yiming's breathing suddenly became much heavier. He stared at Sudbai outside, his Adam's apple trembling constantly. Sudbai turned his head slightly and said to Qin Yiming, "Let's talk about the terms. What can I buy for your life?" Qin Yiming felt relieved and had a smile on his face. "I can give it to you." Sudbai suddenly tilted his head in the other direction. "Sorry, I changed my mind." Boom. 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 In the past few days, I will update twice a day, because Long needs to spend some time writing an outline for the next story world. Let me first reveal that the next story world will be a killing game between listeners in the form of passing notes. There are many details and specific rules that Long needs to think about carefully. It will take a lot of time to wait until the settings are written. Yes, Long will post it on the public account for everyone to take a look in advance. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao Long. Chapter 162. The moment Subai fired, Qin Yiming's eyes exploded directly, and balls of silk threads were released from every pore of his body. This was a self-mutilation way to fight back. Obviously, he was not willing to be teased by Subai like this. Then kill. Gamblers are scary, but in the eyes of gamblers, there are interests, reluctance, and bonds, and Subai, who completely offended him, didn't care about interests or not. Even if he lost everything, he would do it regardless of everything. I'll kill you. Boom. Boom. Subai aimed the bullets at the car in front of him and fired them, releasing clusters of golden particles with the brilliant color of death. This car, which was basically scrapped, was completely reduced to scrap metal in the face of a round of bullets. At first, Qin Yiming, who was struggling desperately, could still resist it with his own metal fibers, but in the end, as Subai didn't want to as he continued to shoot like money, the metal fibers began to break, and blood began to continuously overflow from the pores on Qin Yiming's body. It was extremely miserable. In the end, he let out a final roar of unwillingness, and his body was hit by bullets without any protection. Boom. Boom. Finally, Subai stopped. Among the broken metal in front of him, a puddle of flesh and mud splashed everywhere. With a sigh of relief, Subai slowly knelt down, pressing the muzzles of his two guns against the ground to support his body. The pleasure of killing a powerful audience began to wrap around his heart, and he felt a kind of pleasure from the inside out. Subai himself felt a little smiley, spending so many story points just to find pleasure for himself, he really mental illness. At this moment, in the meat sauce, a heart wrapped in metal fibers suddenly trembled slightly, and then a silk thread suddenly stood up, like a sharp knife, piercing Subai's heart directly. Ajna. Subai suddenly raised his head. His face was covered with blood, but he still had a smile. The muzzle of the gun was raised and pointed forward. Sorry, I still have one bullet. Boom. The metal fiber that was intended to launch the final assassination was immediately annihilated by the shotgun blast at close range, and the heart of Qin Yiming, who was finally wrapped up, also completely exploded in the aftermath. It's all over. Subai stood up, staggering a little. However, at this moment, he suddenly saw Qin Yiming's rotten flesh began to squirm again, and the aura that had disappeared showed a tendency to reappear. Oh, are you a vampire too? Subai did not rush over, but took out all the remaining bullets. There were still 8 bullets left. Since the fight with Qin Yiming, Subai had consumed more than 20 bullets, which means 150 story points. Being consumed is almost equivalent to the reward share for completing a story world with excellence. It is really an extremely expensive victory. After loading the remaining 8 bullets, just enough to fill a Hellfire shotgun, Subai put the bullet back to his waist, held the gun with the bullet, and used the gun to smashed open the junk in front of him and walked in. He stepped on Qin Yiming's rotten flesh. The rotten flesh was actually squirming and seemed to have vitality. However, this vitality was constantly damaged and suppressed by the demon-breaking properties of the Hellfire shotgun. Well, after all, the Hellfire shotgun is a weapon with 1,000 story points. You get what you pay for. Expensive things are naturally expensive. The various remaining demon-breaking attributes and the following are things that Subai cannot understand, and the various residual energies of discrimination are enough to extinguish all the luck Qin Yiming had placed on him. Not caring about the nausea of the rotten meat in front of him, Subai put his hand into the rotten meat and started stirring and groping. Finally, he touched something slightly hot. He took it out, shook off the rotten flesh on it, and finally revealed its original luster. It was a jade pendant. Uperi actually had a human face, and it was Qin Yiming. At this time, Qin Yiming was staring at Subai with resentment. Your life is so damn tough. I've hit you with so many bullets, but I haven't completely killed you yet. Qin Yiming kept cursing Subai. His anger almost made him crazy. However, Subai had little choice about this jade. After all, there were specialties in magic, and Subai was not a magician. Expert, and the most important thing is that Subai is reluctant to destroy this jade. Because Subai had seen clearly before, if the additional attributes of his Hellfire shotgun hadn't been too devastating, Qin Yiming might have escaped death in that state. Damn it, turned into a puddle of rotten flesh, still have a chance to escape? This is simply more vampiric than a vampire. How could Subai, a true vampire, not be jealous when he saw this thing? However, just because Subai didn't know it himself didn't mean that others didn't know it. He held the jade pendant in his hand, then took out his mobile phone and sent a voice conversation request to the monk through WeChat. Subai didn't know if monks used WeChat in the past, but he probably still had to use mobile phones. After all, many famous temples now have to take exams for accepting monks, which depend on diplomas and literacy. Especially now on Weibo and other platforms, many so-called masters and real people are actively marketing themselves, which can be regarded as a kind of advancement with the times. But after entering the story world of Terror Broadcast, it is difficult to use WeChat, because after each mission, Terror Broadcast will invite the audience to pay attention to the broadcast's public WeChat account Kongbu66 when making its concluding remarks. As long as the brain is still there, normal listeners will search and follow it. Of course, Subai himself doesn't know whether there are also listeners who are completely isolated from the world. If he doesn't follow this WeChat public account, he won't even have a WeChat store to redeem it. It should be difficult for a person who is a child to continue to survive in the story world. The monk happened to be free and answered Subai's voice call. Amitba. The monk's signature greeting voice came from the phone. Subai also imitated the monk and replied, Amitba. The monk was silent for a while and said, it seems nothing happened. The poor monk died. Hey, no, I want to ask you something. Subai played with the blood jade while holding his mobile phone with his head sideways. I got a jade pendant. This jade pendant has a human face. How should I give this human face to erase? Human face? Jade pendant? Haha, good stuff. Let's get down to business, Subai reminded. I'll exchange it with you, poor monk. The effect of that magic weapon cannot be maximized in your hand. This is of great use to me and is not for sale. Is that face the person you just killed? The monk asked. Yes, the flesh of the one I just killed is still warm. That is the jade pendant where the soul remains in the jade pendant. It is a jade pendant that can preserve the remnant soul. It is considered very good among magic weapons. The poor monk is also jealous. If you want to erase the remnant soul of that person, it is easy. The most direct way is you can switch to the zombie state and use your zombie's evil spirit to flush it twice, and it will not affect the efficacy of the jade pendant. Oh, thank you, monk. I'll invite you to the hair salon another day. Subai hung up the phone, stood up with the blood jade in hand, and then his whole aura suddenly changed. The zombie bloodline was switched out, and the cold, evil, dirty, and negative attributes were also revealed. Afterwards, Subai consciously forced the evil spirit out of his body and struck back and forth on the blood jade. Slowly, Qin Yiming's face began to become lighter and lighter, the more he fell in love, the more blurry he became, and finally, disappeared completely. The flesh and blood on the ground that was still squirming slightly turned black and smelly in an instant, and finally turned into a pool of pus. The luster of the blood jade was brighter than before. It had a cool feeling when held in his hand, which was very comfortable. Moreover, Subai noticed that the blood jade actually resonated with his vampire bloodline, making his vampire bloodline become more active. It's indeed a good thing, thank you. Subai put the blood jade into his pocket, put away the gun, and then dialed Sunar's phone number. Hey, how are you? Sunar's concerned voice came from the other end of the phone. It's okay, come pick me up and I'll send you the location coordinates. Subai is not worried about the scene here. Terror Broadcasting will be responsible for wiping the things and disturbances in this kind of real mission. Soon, at the corner in front, a black car drove over. Sunar sat in the back and rolled down the window. Subai sat in. In front of him was a driver with a stern face, who looked like a soldier. Are you okay? Sunar held Subai's hand. Fine. When the car drove past, Subai found that neither Sunar nor the soldier driver seemed to have seen the two damaged cars there. It seems that this is indeed the case. The ability of horror broadcast is not only very scary in the story world, but it is still equivalent to a bug in the real world. However, in the real world, it has many limitations on many things it can do, so it needs the help of listeners. Hands to handle some business. In the car, Sunar wanted to bandage Subai's wounds, but when she took out the potions and bandages, she found that the wounds on Subai's forehead and arms had healed on their own. Sunar hesitated to speak, but said nothing. After killing Qin Yiming, Subai's mind has cooled down now, and he has begun to think of his own business. He took out a cigarette, and didn't care whether he wanted to smoke in the car or not, so he just lit it and spit it out. After taking a puff of smoke, Subai asked. Sunar, what do you think would be if Wang Shui turned into a ghost and came back to seek her life? What would she be most eager to know or get? In other words, what would be the thing that binds her most? Sunar was silent for a while, and then looked at Subai. Subai also narrowed his eyes at this time. He also thought. The two people said in unison. A note for the second game. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 163. What Wang Shui should want to know most now is who started the second killing game, which ultimately led to his own death. But what the horror broadcast wants is a bond, a thing, not a so-called message. This actually reduced the difficulty of the task to a certain extent. Now that the investigation has been carried out, it is actually very clear what the binding object is. It is the small note that started the second killing game. Note, did your elder stay? Subai looked at Sunar and asked. Sunar's face showed a rare seriousness, and he said in a deep voice, Subai, why are you suddenly so interested in this case? What is your purpose? It's a long story. If I don't tell you, will you stop helping me? Subai asked. How is that possible? We are friends, and it was picked up from a paper basket. The other party actually changed the way of passing the note, instead of having a person directly pass the note face to face. Of course there is no need to pass the note face to face. Subai stretched out his hand out of the window and shook the cigarette ashes. As long as the initiator is one of the four girls back then, they have actually completely mastered the effective note. Groups, those who are just soy sauce, those who did not really participate in the action in the first time, can be completely ignored, and instead send notes to those who participated in the action in the first time, about 10 people, or even the number of people is smaller, and then it creates a feeling of the game starting again, or the excitement of hundreds of people continuing to play the game together. That's fine. In this way, the work pressure has been reduced a lot. If you continue to follow the previous process, it is more than enough for just one person. And restarting the game is actually very simple. You only need one sentence. Wang Shui is not dead, the game continues. Subai threw away the cigarette butt and reached out to touch his chin, This can also further prove that the person who started the second killing game is one of the 4 girls. My elders' belongings have been sealed in my place, but it is not the home you went to before, but my own single house in Shanghai. I will take you to get it now. Before she died, she told many stories about tell me and give her belongings to me for safekeeping. That's the best. Subai breathed a long sigh of relief. The dawn of the mission being completed was right in front of him. Suner told the driver another address, and the driver nodded. After a while, the car fell into that kind of silence again. In the end, it was Suner who broke the silence first. Subai, are you under a lot of pressure now? Suner is well aware of Subai's tendency to desire to kill. The murder club has been disbanded recently. For others, it is just one less exciting thing to do, but for Subai, the impact is particularly great. No, I'm quite enjoying it lately. Yes, I really enjoy it, I really enjoy it. With Subai's current personality and behavior pattern, it seems that he has found his best place to vent in the story world of horror broadcast. Is there any place more suitable for a mentally ill person to survive than in the story world of bloody killings? Suner sighed and looked at Subai. Wait a while and come back to London with me. I have arranged a hospital for you. When Subai heard about London, he suddenly thought of Sophia. The woman said she wanted to buy her wand. She only had 8 bullets left and needed story points. Or she could ask Sophia to exchange the bullets for him and then come and exchange that magic wand with yourself. Anyway, for Subai, that magic wand can only be used as a fire stick, and the effect of a blunt weapon is similar to that of a Hellfire shotgun. The Hellfire shotgun with bullets is more powerful and practical. Naturally, it is stronger, and it is the best thing to use it in exchange with Sophia. In addition, Subai also has a string of beads taken from the wrist of the female assassin listener in the previous story world. It should be suitable for some metaphysics enhancers. These beads can also be exchanged for bullets. Now that there are not enough bullets, 2 guns are equal to 1 gun, which makes Subai very insecure. The advantage of enough bullets is already clear. Qin Yiming, who has blood jade and is definitely a level higher than Subai, is just like this. He died with hatred under the continuous fire of his own bullets, which is enough to show how great the impact of super weapons on a battle situation. Okay, Subai agreed simply, and then took out his mobile phone. He thought of the fat man. Yes, this damn fat man almost killed himself, Gyatso and the monk in the last story world, but now that he thinks about it, thinking about it, it seems that Fatty is the most suitable person to trade that string of beads. Subai remembers the past things in his heart, but he still has to look forward to everything. Maybe if he is in the same story world with Fatty next time, Subai will shoot Fatty without hesitation, no matter what it is. The situation has changed, let's kill this fat guy first. But this is the real world. For the time being, Subai can't do what Qin Yiming did, neglecting the real task of getting closer to the horror broadcaster and not doing it properly, but instead take the initiative to kill someone just to vent his anger. Audiences who have plotted against themselves in the story world but have not established a cause and effect relationship with themselves in the real world. Suner didn't know what Subai was thinking. She was surprised that Subai agreed to her so straightforwardly, but since Subai agreed, it was for the best. She believed that Subai's illness could be alleviated and treated. After all, nowadays, medical technology is so advanced, and human research on spiritual and psychological aspects is also changing with each passing day. Just after Subai sent Fatty a WeChat message to inquire, the car drove into a villa area. Suner's own home is here. The Laolu family is a red family in the country. It goes without saying much in terms of assets. There must be some family members who are incapable of entering politics and go to the sea to do business. Invests to provide the family with the resources required have become more mature and stable in recent years, both in terms of domestic political and economic systems. This has made it more and more difficult for the second generation to make money and do business simply by relying on their families. Well, 10 years ago, there were really not many family members who went out to do business and ended up losing money. It was just a matter of making more or less. Don't get me wrong. It's true that this is my home, but I didn't buy it. It was assigned to me by my country. I only have the right to live in it, and I am not qualified to buy or sell it. It does not count as my personal assets. Suner swiped the key card, opened the door, and led Subai in. Subai smiled and said, "You know, I won't care about this. If you are willing, I will give you a few sets." Suner chuckled, "Young Master Su, to be honest, there are probably not many people in our circle who are richer than you. My parents died early, and all they left me was money." Subai also teased himself. Sometimes, Subai himself didn't know how much money he had. In short, his parents did have the foresight to start several companies. In the end, they did not deliberately train Subai to be their successor. Of course, it was also because Subai was relatively young at that time, but his parents had confirmed the professional manager system very early, which was considered the earliest one in the mainland. Family-style management was still more popular in large enterprises in the mainland. Manage. Therefore, even if Subai's parents died early, Subai didn't care about anything, but the business group at home was getting bigger and bigger like a snowball. Sometimes Subai himself wondered if his parents knew that something was going to happen. So they deliberately left such an estate and arrangement for themselves, for fear that they, their only son, would have no food to eat in the future. "Come on, you are a rich man. I will speak up if I really need it." Suner walked into his study room. There was a safe there. Suner unlocked it, opened the safe, and took out a mahogany box from inside. "The note is right here, here it is for you." Suner handed the box directly to Subai. Just when Subai was about to reach out to pick up the box, his cell phone rang suddenly. It was an incoming call alert from Chu Zhao's home. The landline phone at Chu Zhao's home and his mobile phone were the mother and child numbers, so it could be seen from the incoming call alert, and Chu Zhao was tied up at home by himself, and his cell phone was specially taken away by him. With Jixiang watching, Chu Zhao couldn't break free. Therefore, this call could only be made by someone who is currently at Chu Zhao's home. Well, to be precise, it is not considered a person. "Hello." Subai took the mahogany box with one hand and answered the phone with the other. "It's me." Xiao Hui's voice. "I found what I was looking for your aunt. I'll go back and get it for you right away," Subai said. "No need, I've seen through it, I've seen through it." Xiao Hui's voice became weaker and weaker, giving people the impression that she was heartbroken, like an old man who suddenly fulfilled a wish or obsession that had been accumulated in his heart for many years, and then often lost the energy to continue living. "Son, he will die soon." Subai looked at the mahogany box in his hand and was stunned. Then he immediately picked up the phone and shouted, Life is still so beautiful, you have to be strong and continue to live. I haven't given you anything yet, but you just left in despair. Isn't the task I've been working on for so long in vain, and I wasted so many bullets? It's not necessary, haha, it's really not necessary." It seems that Wang Shui really didn't know what happened, and she actually planned to disappear. Subai took a deep breath and looked at Suner. Suner was not an outsider anyway. He immediately seemed to be a different person and said fiercely, "If you dare to die before I go back, I will find a way to kill your relatives, your parents, and your relatives one after another and turn you into a vicious ghost like you. You will never be reincarnated." Suner covered her mouth. Wang Shui on the other side of the microphone.